First, serious about online trading? Secure your funds, keep your merchandise safe, and use a company that keeps the buyer and seller protected the whole way through. That's escrow.com. Payments you can trust.
FD was built by domain investors to increase your inquiries, sales, and profit. Forget spreadsheets and archived emails. Manage your entire investment portfolio in one place using a secure and completely confidential platform. Learn more at FT.com. That's EFTY. FT.com.
Last session. Okay. So first, an ICA plug. Everyone up here is an ICA member.
Can we do like thanks?
Why aren't you? Does everybody know about the ICA? Are there people that show of hands, who does not know what the ICA, the Internet Commerce Association?
The dyslexic CIA, right?
No. Anybody want to talk about the ICA?
If you are a domain owner, if you make money from domain names, then the only thing between you and the loss of your rights as a domain owner is the ICA. Mm-hmm. It is the only body, the only organization, the only association which represents the rights of domain name owners, whether you're a domain investor or you're a business owner who has one domain name. Doesn't matter. As a domain owner, your rights are governed by a very complex relationship between ICANN and VeriSign. And essentially, you are at their whim. And very much like politics, well, I don't think there's very many more bureaucratic or political situations than ICANN, but very much like, at least American politics, everything is governed ultimately by lobbying. And so the reason why you have awful things in the food that you eat is because there's a lobbying group that allows that. They push congressmen to allow laws that allow them to put horrible things in your food because it reduces their cost of producing that food.
ICA will
The ICA will put horrible things in your food. Now, the ICA is protecting your rights, meaning that they're helping you maintain your cost of goods sold, the inventory that you carry. They're making sure that the price of the domains that you own are not arbitrarily, the price of the renewals of the domains that you own and registration is not arbitrarily increased, and or the cost base isn't arbitrarily increased, which then of course a registrar will pass on to you, probably in multiples. And but even beyond that, like, trademark rights and overreaching, trademark lobbies are very, very, very powerful. And so trademark lobbies
even the lawyers are in these UDRP panels.
Oh, don't get me started on lawyers.
I'm not. That's why I took over. So if there's a UDRP filing against your name, the lawyers that are on this panel making the decision, they're not domain lawyers, they're intellectual property lawyers, right?
Most of them represent the brands that are suing you.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, who represents us? And that's the ICA.
Yeah. And if you don't have a voice at the table, then you don't matter. And if you think that if you don't matter, that ultimately your rights aren't going to get trumped, what's the word?
Trumped.
Trumped?
Trampled.
Trampled? I'm going with trampled.
I feel like trumped is.
I feel like trumped is, but I'm going with trampled.
I'm okay with trumped.
Trumpled.
Trampled isn't a word.
I actually sold Trumps.com last year.
Trampled, I think.
I'm going with trampled. So if you think that if you don't have a voice at the table, that your rights aren't going to be trampled on, I mean, it's like if you give somebody, an inch, they're going to take a mile. And the moment that you relinquish any amount of your rights to trademark organizations or anybody for that matter, they're going to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And so the ICA is the only defense mechanism, the only protectionary body that protects the rights of domain owners. Very simple. Mm-hmm. And so if you aren't contributing in whatever capacity you're able or willing, you're basically just saying, I don't really care about the rights that I have as a domain owner.
Or your assets.
Yeah, and really, you don't have a voice at the table. I've been involved in some of the ICANN working groups and some of the other things, and unless somebody's actively there speaking on your behalf, they don't understand per se the position that domain owners have. They might label you as cyber squatter and not really understand the full scope that you actually have valuable names that are generic that you have, but the IP attorneys will come and talk, and you only hear their side without a representation. Most recently, I've seen the ICA do some really good work around some of the legacy TLDs were coming up for a contract to basically remove any renewal pricing restrictions so they could charge whatever they want, and they argued against that, which really helps everyone here who has domains. If your name's double, triple, quadruple in price one year, what's that going to do for your carrying costs? Without the ICA, I don't think that would have been prevented.
So I want to introduce Camila. Stand up, turn around. How am I doing, Camila? Am I doing okay? Promoting the ICA? Yeah, all right. So just see Camila later, bring your credit card, and she'll charge it, and then you'll be a member of the ICA.
But in all seriousness, please come talk to me if you have any questions. These guys did an amazing job explaining what we do. If you have any other questions, come talk to me. Thank you.
Just one more comment that I will make, which is that, like, when I originally joined the ICA, there was, the minimum level to join was quite high for the average domain investor. And they've now opened it up to like multiple tiers, and so for a very minimal commitment, you can become a member. Being a member has tremendous amounts of benefits, one of which is being on an email chain and being in contact with all of the people that you see on this panel, as well as, I don't know, tens or hundreds of others.
Hundreds.
About 100 members.
Yeah, and these are the most influential and successful people in our business. I know that myself, that was like one of the initial reasons, was like, I'm looking at these names.
He
like,
wanted
okay,
to be on
I want to be on that
email string
panel
with himself.
Yeah, I want to be
because he's
exactly.
like, I want to talk to myself.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop.
It's going to be a good panel. I feel that's my water.
Zach Muscovich is a great attorney, and it's good to hear his point of view on things that are happening in the industry, which you get from being in the ICA, and you get to have access to his brain, which is really invaluable in my opinion.
Even if he's Canadian.
I don't know if it's invaluable because you can pay his hourly rate. And
That's true.
All right, so we've covered Italian recipes,
Right.
ICA, Canadians, and
Canadian.
being on an email. A hate or love of Canadians.
Okay. So I think we're done.
That's
All
it.
right.
Yeah, all right.
Good night, everybody.
Drink.
So what is this panel? Navigating appraised value versus market value, which I suppose means wholesale versus retail, right? If at any point anybody wants to ask a question of any panelists, just shout out and interrupt. Oh, wait, there's beers.
Beer.
Nice. This is a good panel.
Hello.
Okay, everyone can just talk amongst themselves.
Right.
Shove a few beers now.
All right, now we're
Who
talking.
knew?
That's right.
Who knew?
All right,
No,
cheers.
thank you.
Sorry, 2 minutes.
So I'm taking over.
What about for them?
Cheers.
Cheers, you guys.
I'm taking over for Braden because he's dilly-dallying.
I am.
So I'm going to just make a comment, which maybe we can then all just talk about.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
I really firmly believe, and I've sort of made this into my narrative when I'm talking to an end user, that domain names as an asset class are really unique and interesting for investors from the standpoint that I don't know of any other asset class where the delta, the difference between the price and the value is so great. Okay, and so the price being like the market value, the price which a domain may be liquid at, the price at which any of us could have bought a domain in the auction yesterday. And then there's the value, so the enterprise value, the utility value of these domains. You take great domain, and we can all sit here and talk about what we think that domain is worth and why. And then somebody comes along and they buy that domain and they invest and they build a business on it. And there's this question of would that business be worth what it is today? Could they have achieved what they've done without that domain? And if the answer is no, which I would say it's never going to be exactly the same. And so the delta between what they would have been without the domain and what they've done with the domain, the utility value specific to that domain, represents the enterprise value in my mind. Maybe, but false.
And the proof of that is when, let's use voice.io, appraisedvoice.com, or anybody that I sold packet.com last year to packet.net, right? Because they felt like they really needed the single word .com, the most generic. easiest to spell. There's so many domain upgrades that happen all the time for that very reason, because they recognize the fact that it's time to.
But I would add, and I maybe contradict a little bit, that the utility of voice.com to Block One, the purchaser, is completely different than the utility of voice.com to me or you or you, right? And this is
utility enterprise value don't apply to us.
But I would say
market value applies to us, and we have to speculate on what could that enterprise value.
But that's the problem is I don't believe there's really one value for a domain, one retail value, or there probably is a wholesale value is probably consistent or a lot more consistent, right? But the retail value is just all over the place, and I think that's one of the problems that people have, the average person, with domains, and why they don't like us, right? Because they feel that we're not giving them a straight answer sometimes, or we're taking advantage, or whatever it is, right? But it's really hard to put an actual market value, I think, on a domain, other than it is what somebody will pay, right? And what you'll wait out and force them to pay.
And it's very fluid, right? I think both actually the wholesale and retail end up being fluid, because if you look at like some of the auction activity in the aftermarket now, which you see tons of details on, sometimes you see some auctions that really go a lot higher than what I think the wholesale value would be, but clearly there's somebody else in the auction that believes the wholesale value is higher, and so now they're raising that bar, and maybe, we don't know right who's in the auction, maybe it's an end user.
Yeah, there's a lot of end users.
Right, and so now you're in it as a domain investor going, oh boy, maybe this was worth more than I thought. Okay, well now it's up to 10,000. Oh, this name must be worth $50,000, and really, no, there's one end user that wants to pay 10,000 for it, and a few other investors that are kind of like coming along for the ride.
But there's so many variables. So if we apply a retail value on it, we're thinking about the highest and best use for that name, which may not be the buyer that's in front of us, right? But they would like that name,
you may
but
not know what that highest and best use is.
So,
or they may not be the one to give the highest.
I explicitly disagree with you. I think that people are confused by the two terms of value and price. So the prices are very fluid. So and the reason prices are so fluid is because none of us agree on how to value a domain. And I think that the greatest hurdle to the entire domain industry and to the value of all of our names is truly just a agreed upon and data-driven approach to domain value. And I think that so I think there are very subjective factors that can go into the value, the enterprise value, that highest and best use case value of a domain name. But for the most part, I think that most of the value, maybe it's 80% of the value of a domain, can be calculated. And I think that when people understand why, and when you look at the data that's behind it, and you say, okay, this is really the value, then you can be a bit more firm, and this is what I believe the value is, and this is why. And maybe the buyer that comes to you is not the best and highest use case buyer for that domain, and therefore you have the option to say, well, I want liquidity, and I'll sell it for less than what I think it's actually worth. But that doesn't mean, just because the domain's sold for that, doesn't mean that's the value of the name.
Agreed.
So the Rick Schwartz approach, right? Like, it's like, he's like, great, you made me a good offer, it's serious, but you're not the best buyer for this name, sorry. And so you're either gonna overpay for your utility value, or I'm gonna wait for the best buyer.
But do you agree, can you agree that a lot of that is arbitrary?
I
think it's subjective, but not arbitrary.
I think it's subjective, and I think that's why an appraisal is important.
Sorry, gotta go.
Because nobody up here is gonna agree if we could probably get close, right? But we wouldn't agree on a price for any particular name. And I think that's why appraisals have value, not so much as like, okay, this is the be all and end all price, but in comparison to other domains and other assets, it tells you this one's better, this one's worse, and gives you, if I were to get a .pt domain name, I have a limited market of Portugal as my focus. If I, so I can know, okay, from there, what's the market, what's their GDP, what's the market value on this industry, and try and figure those things out. And if I were to compare that .pt to a .es, don't get mad if you're Portuguese, but if I compare it to .es, and Spain has a bigger GDP, and .de, Germany, bigger, so I can kind of use different data to look at and figure out why would one particular domain name be more valuable than another. It might not arrive at a set price, but it gives me indicators and other things to look at when I'm pricing a name for myself, and I think that's really important.
But would anybody on this panel have priced voice at 30 million?
No.
No, absolutely
Right.
not.
So that's what I'm saying. That's my
But I think we have
point.
to, well, I think we have to
Good.
bifurcate this a little bit, because you have the Rosener equation, which I think is probably the best attempt at valuing premium domains. And I think it's different when you're looking at a premium domain versus a domain that any of us would look at and go, no, I don't know, it's not great. So I think there would be almost more consensus on that side than the premium side, where you do have the ability, you could have someone that would sell a voice.com for $1 million and be incredibly happy with it, and wouldn't take a penny under 30 million. And so I think really when we're talking, at least for this conversation, it feels like we're talking more about the premium side of the market, which is fair. But
So I agree with that. Okay, so that comes back to what he was saying about arbitrary factors in valuation.
It's what you want to
because
charge,
those are
right?
arbitrary, but the arbitrary factors affect the price, not the value. Value is constant. Like, as far as I'm concerned, value is constant, and the only factors that affect value are supply and demand. And so we are increasing the population of people online. We're increasing the population of businesses online, which at an even faster rate than people. And so, and if we're talking .coms, then supply is decreasing significantly.
Yep.
So for me, like over a longer period of time, zooming out, I don't, until any of those factors change, valuation should continue to increase directly, in direct correlation with the supply and the demand curve. But price is far more arbitrary. And the number one arbitrary, well, there's two primary arbitrary things, and that is who's the buyer and who's the seller. Right? Like, Rick Schwartz might say, no, I won't sell you voice.com until it's $30 million. And, Morgan might have sold it at 500. So, that's the arbitrary part. It's who's the buyer, who's the seller, and timing.
Yes. Yeah.
Agree. So then we are saying the same thing.
I think you guys are kind of in agreement. Yeah.
But
it's more fun to watch.
But even but even pegging the value is there are factors that I just don't think there's a consistency there. It's just not the same.
The only
because
reason
domains are so
consistency-
unique. They're so unique. They're not subject to the same rules as other assets that are much easier to have comps.
So I agree with you 110%. In fact, it's like one of my strongest arguments that I make to people, because every buyer wants to come and show me comps. And as far as I'm concerned, there's no such thing as a comp when it comes to domains, because by definition, each domain name, that is what makes domains inherently valuable, is scarcity. And so each one is unique. You cannot compare one domain to another.
Always. I mean, there are comps sometimes.
I mean,
They're comparable factors, but it's just not the same.
Comps.
Well, no, I mean, if you've got a word like,
Voice
lawyer,
and sound.
Lawyers, attorney,
No,
those are all
no.
pretty close.
Nope, wrong. So it is. It's
Braden is
wrong.
never wrong. Come on.
It is. It's wrong. So there are comps. Comps matter when it comes to wholesale value, right? Like, I'll buy a 3letter.com for $25,000 because over the last 30 days I saw, 27 of them sell for $23,000 to $28,000. So I can use that as a comp for my liquid value of an investment. But if I buy ziz.com, there's no comp for that, because the buyer for ziz.com is not the same buyer for lil.com or qiq.com. These are completely separate, and you simply cannot compare.
Right, but that was not my example.
Yeah, I think
But give me a better comp than
So can't you comp lawyers.com against attorneys.com?
So lawyers.com and attorneys.com would be, yes, they're comparable.
I'm sorry, what was that word again?
all right.
No, but let me caveat that, because, I mean, where do you want to compare,
But
right?
they're
So
not
it's
an exact comp,
they're
right?
comps
Like,
depending on the
comps.
conversation
they're not
you're
exact,
having.
but
they're like,
you
it's
can
like a
compare.
Venn diagram where,
Well,
I mean, they're
no comp is ever
No,
going to be exact.
But
right?
listen,
not, but
it's
the
like
comp-
it's very simple. You go and you look and you say, okay, well, attorneys has whatever, I don't know, 285,000 exact match searches, and lawyers got 1.2 million exact match searches. And I'm just making up numbers here, but it's like, okay, if you got some super high-powered attorney on the phone, and he's like, well, attorneys.com sold for $1 million. Why do you want 5 million for lawyers.com? Very simple. There's 5 times more people searching for lawyers than there is for attorneys. End of story. And so it's like you can say that's a comp because it's similar in nature.
I'm not saying the price is going to be the same, but it's a comp.
That's what I'm trying to say.
But you're not going to compare it to something
What
else.
Does that mean, comp?
Well, I think
So
I think
if
this
we're not
comes into
if we're not using it as a comp for price, then what is it a comp
Well, but
for?
look at this, like, because we talk about, this is like
How?
well, in real
Okay.
estate, you do like per square foot
Yeah, so
price,
this is what
right?
this is what I was just going to say.
Yeah,
This
but
is the
it's-
pro and con of us
Right.
talking about domains as digital real estate, right? Because you look at real estate, you go, what about the houses on either side of you? And it's like, well, if you were buying a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house and the person next to you happened to tear down the house and build a 6-bedroom, 5-bath house, is it a comp? Sure, in some ways, just like the attorney and lawyer example, it is, because like they're in the same neighborhood, they're next door to each other, except one is like much bigger and new and fancy, the other one is the old one that the grandma still
Well, but
lives in.
even,
But you can
even
factor
that
those in.
example,
So the
Yeah,
finishes,
exactly. That's what I'm saying. They're related
finishes
though,
can
they are
be,
comps.
the
Right.
cost per click,
Right.
and the square footage is the search volume. All right. So if you want to like really make it a residential, I think it's more like commercial real estate comparisons. But if you want to use residential real estate, it's like this house is super well finished, brand new renovated, so it's got like a $50 cost per click. Versus the house that was built in 1960, it's up for renovation, that's got a 50 cents per click. But they might have the same search volume, but this one sold for some large multiple. And so the way that real estate is comped using square footage, I think that domain names can be comped using, you just have to go another level down and say, well, search volume. I mean, to me, that's...
Well, not just search volume though, but in
CPC
going back to what you're saying on the commercial side, right? Because generally speaking, a domain that is in an industry that can create more value, more money, right? So if you're selling pens, I don't care if you own pens.com, which might have 1 billion searches, right? But not just the CPC, but like the value of that individual widget versus
But that gets reflected in the CPC.
Right, but I'm saying so pens.com won't be as valuable as something else, as gold.com or yachts.com, right?
Yeah.
It's just not the same.
Yeah, I would say like if you look at the example like that you gave, you'd look at like attorneysandlawyers.com and look at the search volume, but then correlate that with, all right, well, it turns out people pay double the CPC for attorneys. Therefore, even if lawyers had a third more search volume, I'd probably go for the former just because the CPC is higher. There's probably people willing to pay more for it.
Well, I think maybe if we approach this from another angle, it might be more helpful. Like when we go buy names, if we're going to spend our own money, 10, 20, 30, 50,000, whatever we're spending, we definitely can identify like what's a comp and what should we be paying, right? Because we look at different factors. So I think that might be a little bit easier than what do we want to sell it for.
Yeah.
When we're trying to buy something, we look at a lot of the things like that Ammar brought up. What's the potential for this? What kind of desirability is there for this? When people are searching, or what other types of sales happened around this keyword? Is there a lot of desirability? Who might get confused by going this name versus another name? Or
Is it
really
ephemeral?
yeah.
Is it
What
ephemeral
extensions
or
are
timeless?
registered?
Yeah, so I think that those things definitely help to separate what's more valuable than less valuable, and even help for me personally, but for me to be able to put a price tag on what I'm willing to spend, right?
Yeah.
So totally, at the
Yeah, I
wholesale level, comps are very important.
Right.
Yeah.
You're right.
But I
Probably more
think-
productive conversation to
Right.
talk about like the wholesale market and investing.
Well, we should talk about the wholesale market because
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I feel like the wholesale market's been going up.
Only on GoDaddy.
No, I think it's been going up every year.
Joe's fault.
No, I'm
Because I'm not
seeing it
allowed to
pretty
buy on
much.
GoDaddy, so every other marketplace that I check to try and buy names has been going up too.
No, I mean, I'm on,
So
I watch a
why?
Dropcatch and I'm watching GoDaddy, I'm watching NameJet, and I feel like it's going up everywhere.
Yeah.
All right, so why is it going up?
I think it's more people in the market.
I think so, too.
More
I think so,
people
too.
are realizing that there are people out there like all of us,
More
that are
investors.
that are buying and selling domain names, and
And I think we're
that's
willing
really-
to pay
that's
more
really
because we're pretty hyped about, what we see, at least I see.
Yeah.
I feel like prices on the really good names, sale prices are going up.
Right, yep.
So then I'm
Agreed.
willing to invest more because I know I get more.
Yep. Yep. That delta is increasing. It's like, end user pricing is kind of running away, and the wholesale market's been kind of stagnant.
Yeah.
And so those unique names, because they're still really good deals. I mean, like, look at the auction yesterday.
Yeah.
Maybe I was making horrible purchases, but I was like,
Yeah,
oh my God, I felt like I was buying pennies on the dollar. Maybe
But
that was wrong, but
no. But no, I think you're right. But I do also, as the wholesale prices go up, and as I'm having to bid higher and higher to win a name, I'm adjusting the names that I'm going after.
Mm-hmm.
And because you do have to think about carrying costs,
Yep.
you do have to think about
that money's dead.
Right.
And so the names that a few years ago I could have gotten for $500,000, $1,500. Right now they're $2,500, $3,000.
500 or 1,000
Right.
or 50.
Yeah.
Not 500,000.
So it's changing. So now I'm also adjusting kind of the names that I'm going to go for. Now the names that are just more for inventory, I don't want to spend more than $500, right?
Yeah.
So I'm still buying a lot of names in that, let's say 250 to 500 range, but those are different than the names
Right.
that I'm going after that are the 5, 10,
Yeah, the
15,
unique
20.
ones.
But have you increased your sales prices? Are they selling for more, or are you just making a slimmer margin now?
I've increased sales price. I generally don't sell anything. Like, I just always have high margins. So that's
So you
part of
don't-
my
you-
mistake.
So you just say you don't ever sell anything?
I don't ever sell anything cheap. So, and that's probably part of my problem, right? That's a advice to anybody out there who is, investing, who might be newer. You have to really figure out what works for you, and if you're willing to hold. I've been, over my career, more of a guy that'll hold, and
Buy and
I'll just
hold.
hold out, right? But I've also even adjusted that a little bit now, right? I'm still not to the point of some people that are always flipping, right? Like, we were hearing stories earlier this afternoon. One of the investors that was in the auction yesterday, he had bought 5 names and he already sold them today. He bought them yesterday, he sold them today. And, right? So he made, he made good money for very little
How did he
effort.
sell them? They're not even in his name yet. He hasn't even paid for them.
Right, he sold some, he sold 2 of them. He sold 2 of them within half an hour of
No,
buying.
he sold one of them to me
Yeah.
for within literally 5 seconds. He won the bid, and I was like, wait a minute, that hit reserve? And I was like, how much are you gonna pay? And
Right, so that's one that's one extreme, right, of how you want to do something. And then there's the other extreme where you're like, no, this is a name I really believe in, and I'm just gonna wait till I get my
Well, on the
number.
higher end, the Booth brothers do that, right?
Right.
They'll buy a premium name. They'll pay $50,000 for it or something.
But they want to get rid of it within a week.
Right, and they'll just put 10 or 20 points on it and sell it to one of
Right.
us.
Right.
So one of the sort of frameworks that has, which I didn't start thinking, I think Yanni is actually the one that told me to think about inventory this way in domains. And it was basically, is it a domain that you can replace? And if you can easily replace it, then if you've got like an offer that's within the order of magnitude of the price that you think is appropriate, then you should probably take it, because the next buyer, unless it's a name that's getting like a lot of inquiries, and you really know there's a couple of major hitters out there. But for the most part, like, let's say the bottom 60-80% of your portfolio, if it's a name that you feel that you can go on Namejet, Dropcatch, GoDaddy, and buy a new name that's comparable, then you should take that buyer, whatever the buyer is that you've got. It's probably the last buyer you're going to have for a while, or the best buyer you're going to have for a while. And so you should take that and then take the profit and then reinvest, replace the name. And that resonated with me. I thought it changed the way that I started pricing names, or that I handled inbound offers.
And I think that's good advice for another reason, which is you constantly refresh your portfolio.
Totally.
Because there's other people that have these older portfolios and they sit under names, and trends change and things change. And if you're not constantly buying and renewing your portfolio, then it helps in both ways.
Yeah, it's also why you can't have a uniform strategy for pricing names in your portfolio or evaluating offers, because you really have to separate your portfolio into however many pieces
Boxes,
you want to, right? And to say, okay, maybe this chunk, sure, maybe you have 10 or 15% of your portfolio that you're like, all right, I'm willing to wait 10 years, 20 years, however long, because I want top dollar, because this is a name that I can't replace. That's a really good name. I got a great deal on it. I want to sell it for top dollar. And then there may be something down there where it's like, all right, I can turn down some offers, but like eventually I need to sell it. And then others where it's like, okay, I don't get offers on this very much. If I can sell this and double my money, great. I can go in and buy the exact same name, tomorrow.
What do you think is a fair multiple? So when you buy a name, you want to sell for 3 times, 5 times, 10 times. I shoot for 10x.
I think it comes back to what Morgan was just saying, which is, it depends on the box that it's in. So, like sometimes I'll overpay for a name because I just know that that's money in the bank. It's like, it's such a good name, and you might not get your 5x or your 10x on that name, but you also have a very limited downside. And so I think it depends on the category. If you're buying names at $100, $250, $500, I'm generally shooting for like at least a 10x or a 20x or even more, but because those names turn over slower. So you need that's a numbers game, right? Those smaller names, you're going to have a lot of them, and you're going to sell 2 to 4% a year if you price them appropriately, and just keep turning them over. But they don't turn over as quickly. Whereas you might have, or you might not have, but let's just say you've got 100 really good, like irreplaceable names. If you bought them today, right? Like we can't say if you bought them in '94, right? But if you bought them today, it would be probably pretty difficult to sell that for 10x, because like a really good oneword.com to buy in the market today, you're going to be hard pressed to find one for under 100 grand.
Right. So the higher you go in terms of starting today, if you're paying 50 or 100 grand for a name today, you could do 10x or more. It just, if you find, if the stars align.
But that's the diamond in the rough.
Right. But chances are
you're going to hit a double or a triple.
That's what I've found. So the names that I've bought, 5, 6 years ago for 25, 35,000, I can get 10x.
Yes.
But the names that I feel like I'm buying the same quality names today for like 70 and 80,000, and I'm not going to get 10x, right? Because they're still worth that 350 to 500 range.
Yeah. So what's interesting to me is that, literally what we're all saying is like our margins are being squeezed. And I think that that's true. And I think that's a result of more people in the market, more competition to get these names, and valuations are increasing, but the markets, are just uneducated, and so they're not increasing at the same rate as the educated people who want these names at wholesale prices. And so our margins are getting squeezed, but in the end, that's a good thing, because if you're an active, if you're an active investor who's still replacing names, what's happening is increased liquidity. So the big names are selling at a much faster rate than they ever used to.
I think it's because the market realizes the value more now than they did
for a number of factors, right? But it's the liquidity is increasing. It's still not tremendous. We're still way less liquid than real estate and other stuff, but it's definitely increasing, no question.
And the margins are still like there's no comparison.
Totally comparison. But margins follow liquidity, right? So the more liquidity you've got, the smaller your margin's going to be. Like in Forex, you've got a minuscule, like less than a basis point.
Massive liquidity.
But it's the most liquid market in the world versus domains, the least liquid market in the world, and but huge margins. Right. If I was in a liquid market, I couldn't charge 15% to sell a domain.
Right, like a house.
Right? Yeah, And houses are, those, I think realtors are overpaid because
it's changing.
It's changing. I mean, they should be making 2 or 3% because that's a fairly liquid market. They're not really adding a lot of value anymore. The consumer that's coming in is mostly educated, so.
We just bought a house. My wife's right here. And we found, hi wife, everybody, Lisa, say hi, Lisa. we would find the houses that we wanted to see online, right? Because they're all listed on Realtor.com and Zillow and whatever, and we say, make an appointment for us to go. And why do we need him to make the appointment? Like, we'll just make the appointment ourselves. But we still went through that, even though we
because
told them
why
to take
not?
us.
Why not? Like, you're going to pay the same commission whether you've got somebody representing you. So at least the person representing you is going to get half. Right? So you might as well have somebody helping.
Put them to work.
Because you're going to pay 6% no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly, there is work to be done, right, after purchasing that. But compared to what he's earning, like I could have hired somebody full time for the year.
The way it used to be, they really did have to show you the houses, but now you find it yourself.
It's really from the pre-internet days that we're still seeing this like similar approach that will change, and now there are startups that are starting to approach this with
that open door. It's like no commissions, go online, put your address in. It's like you got an offer in 24 hours, and after commissions that you pay a realtor, it's like these guys' offers aren't that far off, and it's money in 30 days.
So, what advice would you give newbies, guys that are just coming into this space? Not guys, people, ladies and gentlemen, coming into the space. I say that because my wife is here and she's going to hammer me if I don't correct myself. So what advice would you give new investors to help figure out what's wholesale versus retail and make sure that they're buying right?
Don't register new domains.
Well, and
that's not true.
Thank you, everybody.
Don't
talk
register new domains.
For a new GTLD?
And don't listen to bold people.
Right. Are you saying new GTLDs or are you saying hand reg?
Everything. Like
you're saying only
but actually, let's
well, okay, new GTLDs,
there.
That's I guess that's different because like if you can hand registering new GTLDs, like if you actually really are confident that you know what makes a good domain, and it's literally like the what do you call it, the sunrise period, or what's the when you?
But you're not going to be confident.
That's what I was going to say. That's the hard thing. I think.
And possibly in a relevant industry, right? So you know people.
For most people, I think that's the best advice. Like that, I tell people when they're starting out. First of all, slow down. Don't spend a lot of money because you're going to make a lot of mistakes at first. And second, do something you know. So if you know, like I don't care if it's a new GTLD or not. If you know people that are in the club business, nightclub business, and you know that this is a perfect name for them, you know it. You can explain it to them because you're in that business. So unless you can see the value yourself in something that's a niche, you can't explain that to somebody else. So that's where they should start. And then once they kind of get the feel for, in their own business, what makes a name good and what makes a name, not good, then they can kind of expand that from there. But they really should start with what they know. And also look at tools like NameBio and other things to see what's selling and what the prices are selling for. And kind of educate yourself.
There are lots of tools out there. Learn to use them.
Really educate yourself a lot before, DN Academy is a great thing to try when you're starting out. So really just take your time and get educated and start with something you know, and then expand from there.
Well, and ask the community. People like, my guess is, Michael, you probably get probably a ton of emails from people asking you like, okay, I want to buy this, what do you think? There are a lot of people out here that will give you advice, and maybe it might not be what you want to hear, but I can tell you that this community is definitely the best community to tell you that domain sucks, please don't buy it. And so when people are starting out, there's no better way than to email someone. I would imagine Drew,
and we're not saying that you suck.
He's like, I want to buy this. You'd probably be like, oh, that sucks, don't buy it. You might not be happy about sending that email, but that person's actually getting some advice. That's the huge advantage of this industry, is that we are a tiny, tiny industry. In the real estate space, in the stock market space, in the Forex space, it's a huge, massive industry with a bunch of people selling a million different products to get you into the industry. We're a pretty small space, so people can communicate a lot more directly to people that actually
and we help each other.
Yeah.
We always have.
Joe made a really good point about like NameBio and DN Journal and anybody that's constantly reporting sales. I mean, honestly, it's like, you want to know how to figure out how to value a domain? It's like, look at what sells. I mean, it just couldn't be more obvious. I mean, like when we moved to Lisbon and I'm looking at real estate, it's like, I didn't even want to look at I'm looking at listings, I'm trying to find a place, but if I'm trying to understand the value, I don't care about the listings and the listing prices. I want to see the sales prices. Like what's actually changing hands, and how many square meters, and what was the price? Like that's the only way that you're going to know what the real value is, or the real price at least. and what's changing hands. So,
But you do have to determine wholesale versus
I was going to
retail.
say, yeah, so you have to look at to see where the name sold.
Yeah.
And,
And to whom?
totally,
right?
totally.
Because you don't want to get excited that this name sold for $30 million, and that's not an everyday occurrence, and so you have to know, right?
Totally. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I'll also comment, like, many people have emailed me, commented on blogs, disagreeing with this, but I still firmly believe that if you're a new entrant and a new investor, and you're trying to figure out, like, if you've got a little bit of real money to play with, because quite frankly, today is a very different time than 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Like, honestly, unless you've got a decent amount of money, like, let's say $5, $10, $25,000, like, it's a numbers game. Like, either you're going to put in super hard work, you're going to buy one smaller name, put in the work, find the buyer, flip it, double down, on a bigger name, do the same work until you can build up till you've got that $10, $15, $25,000. I think that's kind of a minimum viable portfolio size to get a consistent sales. But I think if you go to the popular auctions and you're on NamesJet, you're on Snap Names, you're on Dropcatch, GoDaddy, and you see a name that's getting bidding activity, it's a name that you think you've got some relation to in terms of, like, oh, I know why this domain's valuable. If you buy that name and there's other people bidding against you, like, by definition, especially if there's like a couple of people, like ideally there's 2 people or 3 people bidding against you to the end, and you buy that name, like, there's 2 or 3 people who are willing to pay within a very small margin of what you paid. And so not only does that sort of support what the value is to you, unless one of those was an end user, it also means that if you need liquidity, there's probably somebody out there that within 10, 20% of what you paid will buy it. Okay. Now you got to find that person. Maybe it means you resell it on an auction, or maybe forum, or you know the people to sell it to. But inherently you're buying a name that other people want. And unfortunately, like, I get sent thousands of emails, thousands of domains every day from people who have domains that other people don't want. Like, and sorry, if you've got something that nobody else wants, it has zero value. So buying a domain, if you're really just starting out, even though it makes sense to, like, find the name that nobody's bidding on and you think you found a diamond in the rough, if you're just starting out, the chances that you identified a diamond in the rough are real low. Like,
And
real low.
I would add that if you're in an auction, and let's say it's a $5,000 domain, and there's a bunch of people bidding on it, and then you've outbid everybody and you bought that great name, and it's supported by all these other bidders, you just outbid all of us who have been in the business a lot longer and are in the business of buying names, lots of names, and holding on to it, and can afford to do that, and you're buying 1 or 2 or 3 names, you just overpaid for that name because we didn't even think it was worth that much, because we pulled out.
There's other factors.
There are, but I'm saying
We
that
just
could
got
be.
done talking about that we're selling for 5, 10, 20x. So, it's like if you overpaid by 1 bid, it's like, there are circumstances where I 100% agree with you.
Especially the new Gs.
Especially with, well,
I also think we're in a bit of an echo chamber, because what if you're bidding against another relatively novice investor,
that's what I was gonna
or
say.
2 relatively,
I think that's happening
now
all
the 3 of you are bidding against each other.
That's my point, is you don't really know.
So going back to their earlier advice is, before you jump into too deep, learn, watch, observe.
Yeah, because I get people all the time that reach out to me at GoDaddy, and I feel really horrible for them, but they inherited money, or they spent $10,000, and now there's the renewals coming up for these names, and they have the carrying costs, and they didn't sell any of them. And I'm like, well, why didn't you tell me when you had the money? Like, I would have helped you get better names, because you're not going to sell these, and I have to tell them that. It's not a great conversation. I'd rather be honest with them, though, and tell them, like, you should really look at trying to buy names that you know. Like, these, you're going to have to just let these go, because you wasted a lot of your money.
Yep.
So I think I agree, obviously do what you know and start there, but I think if you were to see these names, more often than not, the people that come to me that are new are buying these names that they think, oh man, this is the greatest name ever, and nobody registered it yet, let me get it. And can contrast that with names that you see on an auction with a lot of bids. More often than not, in the long run, you're going to get better names by doing that.
Yeah.
And then you spend $3,000 on a name, only costs you $10 to renew next year instead of, buying 300 names and you have to pay $3,000.
So much of that is psychological. It's like, people think, wow, I got this name for $69, and I got this name for $69, and this one for 28, and but that adds up. You're so much better off buying a name that other people wanted for $3,500 than having 50 names that nobody else bid for $69. It's just like, there's no comparison.
Right.
And back to your original point about hand-registered names,
Don't do
especially
it.
in the
Just
legacy
don't do it.
TLDs.
Yeah, don't do it.
Like, there's a reason why no one else owns it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's
So none of us-
2019.
Yeah.
Nobody else wanted them,
Been able to get it
I
for a
and that's
while.
why they're available.
Look, you can definitely, once in a while, you can get lucky, or you found, you found something, or the,
Yeah.
or right. I was gonna say there's also sometimes new trend happens, or a name had been registered and was dropped, for whatever reason.
And those are anomalies.
Right.
Those are anomalies, and the example you gave of having one good name versus which has only a $10 or whatever
Exactly.
carrying cost versus 100 mediocre to shitty names. You're much better off with the one good name.
Yeah. What do you think? Here's an interesting question for all of us, I guess. I'll ask myself a question too. Take over your job here.
I don't get paid, so it's fine.
Okay, good. Let's take an example here. A name that sells for $2,000 on, we'll say, GoDaddy auctions, even though you can't tell us what the breakdown is if you know it, but what do you think the breakdown is between, and let's say it ends and it has 36 bids at the end, it sells for $2,000. What percent breakdown do you think there is between new investors, seasoned investors, and end users? And since I'm asking the question, I'll kind of start and throw my thought out here. I'd say, 5% or less end user, and maybe 60% intermediate to more seasoned investor, and the balance newer, maybe?
That's about right.
I would guess we're talking like one name, $2,500.
Or yeah,
I would guess
2,500, yeah.
0 to 1 end user.
Yeah.
3 to, how many bidders?
Say 36 bidders.
Yeah, we're talking 3 to 5, max 10 seasoned investors.
Yeah.
And the rest are
Oh, so you think it's
newcomers.
majority new?
Yeah.
Really?
Interesting.
Well, because I think,
yeah, huh.
so when I started out.
I guess it also depends on the price point of that domain. If it's a
That's what I'm saying.
5 figure
Yeah,
name.
$2,000, $2,500. Yeah.
When
Because I think that filters out some of the new. I don't think many new people pay over, say, $1,000 for names that are expiring. That's just my assumption. But
When I started out, I remember somebody telling me there was 300 professional, none of them are professional, but professional domain investors.
we're all professional. What are you talking about?
And so, that was 12, 13 years ago or something. And there was around 300 like professional domain investors. And I would say today there's probably like, I don't know, 5,000 to 10,000 when you take into account India and China and like all of the newcomers in first world countries and Latin America as well. Like I bet there's 10,000 or close to that domain investors, and maybe they're not all full time. Probably they're not.
Yeah.
But people who are actively investing in domains, I think there's close to 10,000. And so that's a lot of new participants, and most of those people are probably not spending more than $1,000 on a domain. Most of them are probably spending no more than 100 actually. But still, it's.
Well, that increase definitely explains why we're all saying, we're seeing like
More
the prices of these auctions go up. And if you think that it's a majority new domainers, they're
I'm
driving-
uneducated though. This
They're
is the only guy who's
driving
actually
prices.
knows.
He probably
I'm
can't
not
tell us though, yeah.
I'm not commenting, but I would say that there's definitely a lot of end users, but you have to think like even for yourself, would you list your names on auction? I mean, most names probably not, right? Why? Because there's not going to be that confluence where all of a sudden within 10 days, there's a bunch of end users that want that name. So it would be the same on a regular, any other auction.
It's the magic of expiring auctions, right? Someone said something on someone's blog, not mine, but someone's a couple weeks ago that was saying, Oh yeah, like the challenge we have now is that I can't remember exactly what they were saying, but just something around the fact that the prices are going up and it's being driven by new investors, not by actual rising market values.
Yeah, no offense to all you auction operators, JT in the house. But literally, like, one of my biggest things when somebody comes to me, like, to broker their domain, they're like, well, I'm thinking about auctioning it, or it's like, look, my personal motto is that auctions are for buying, not selling. Yeah.
Well, because it's going to be wholesale,
Yeah.
right? It's if you want liquidity, fine.
Right.
Yeah.
Sell it to another, but you're leaving money on the table.
Yeah, but somebody said yesterday, and I don't remember, I wish I did remember who it was, but they said, I think it was Frank, that you make a lot of your money on the buy. Too.
Right.
So you
Yeah,
have
that
to
was
buy
the
really
point,
smart.
yeah.
So I think that that's an important factor for a new domainer to consider as well.
I remember what they were saying though. They were saying that it will sell more as an expired domain auction than if you were to take the exact same name and just put it in auction starting at $1.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know why none of you have done that. Like, I think I've sent a support ticket on every auction platform. Like, why don't you guys just like eliminate, like, whether it's expired or private listing, like, it's a name. Like, let's create a real market, like a real market.
Well, the difference is because the private listings always have reserves, or almost always have reserves. The expired
So
ones
that's
don't.
separate, but you just market with a reserve.
But it
and
can
then
have a
it's
reserve
sure.
or not reserve and not identify where it's coming from.
Exactly.
Joe,
Yeah.
you know why?
Because it's good for everybody.
Yeah, the reason why we originally didn't do it was because
JT, you're next, so pay attention.
expiration names we couldn't guarantee you were going to get. And the
Well,
other
now it's
names-
different,
yeah,
for the most
For the
part.
most part. The other thing that we've been told too is that by a lot of investors is they want to buy names that are expired. They don't want to buy names from other people because they figure if they're buying it from another person, they might not get it, right? They might back out, or they might have been people that tried to sell this name already.
may have already been marketed.
Yeah, and they don't want to try and buy it from them because they figure they can't sell it. So those are two reasons why people said.
That's what who is for.
Right, exactly. Or you can look at archive or other things, yeah. But that's what we hear.
Yeah.
JT?
No, I would echo the same thing that Joe said. I mean, when you look at, I think why people value expiry to have more value perhaps than a direct lister or a third party.
Is your mic?
Oh, thanks. Then a third-party seller name. Some of it is the same thing. It's the, some heuristics involved with thinking like, okay, this name has already been kind of picked over and pimped out, for lack of a better term, and has been put on various marketplaces. And if they don't want it, then why should I? But I think this also goes back to something that Drew said earlier. I mean, everybody's situation is different, right? So, I think people have different, if somebody wants the domain because they're ultimately going to use it, if they have a better sense of a particular niche or why it might have value, I mean, that's also assuming that whoever owned it prior to you, was just as good or just as smart or had the same plan that you did to try to sell the name or utilize the name or whatever. So, I mean, I do think there are some mental things around that. I think separately, the idea of why we don't, on NameJet, why we do distinguish between direct listers and the expiries, because our customers have asked for it. So ultimately, that is something that we do for the benefit of our customers, because a lot of our customers do want to know, okay, what is an expiring name versus a direct lister domain? So they can, for all the reasons that we just talked about. So
Yeah, and I don't necessarily agree with that personally if I'm buying a name, but that's what we've heard from customers. So
My argument is just that, so I totally understand that, and as a very active buyer in the market, I also have a bias towards expiry versus privately listed, no question about it. My argument is simply that, and literally I'm probably one of the people most affected by it, but I think that it should be a pure market. I think literally as an industry, the greatest thing that we can do is push towards an agreed upon valuation methodology. And second is creating a clean, true market, a real market where it's asset comes in the market, let's find out what the value is and get rid of all the biases. And so it's somebody really cares if it's expired, check the who is. It's not that hard. And I don't think that it's going to affect your sales. The buyers in the market, I'm buying whether you've got it listed as private lister or expiry, I'm buying.
Well, we're
anyway.
not going to stop buying.
Exactly. It's sure, I might prefer, but it's I'm still going to buy.
Yeah,
you know?
look, a deal is a deal no matter what, right? And even if somebody is selling a name, they might be selling it 30 days before it's going to go to expiry anyway, you know, or something like that. So, you know, it doesn't, I think as a more sophisticated buyer, which obviously everybody up there, you guys are, you know, among the top of all of that. So, you know, you understand that at a different level, but some folks, like, you know, they, you know, also want quick, easy ways to parse the inventory and all of that kind of stuff too. And, you know, and also why a direct lister would want to sell on NameJet, and as you know, because a lot of you have sold on the platform as well. I mean, although, you know, you do get wholesale prices a lot of times on the auction platforms, but, you know, what you pay for the names, if you're trying to sell in bulk, if you're trying to sell a lot of names, if you're trying to sell a lot of names quickly, you know, we obviously have a great team that can really help everybody sell their names. So, you know, that's the plug, but, so, but thank you.
You did have the mic, so.
You did give it to me.
Take the
Give a soapbox.
Yeah, there we go.
We have a few minutes left. We can take some questions. Can we bring a mic up here?
I think Dave had his hand up first.
Thank you.
He's
Dave's
been raising his
fast.
hand for 5 minutes.
But he doesn't get the mic first.
What do you think is acceptable return on investment portfolio-wise for a domainer?
I think it's up to the investor. I mean, everything's relative. I mean, if you're coming from like, you know, the traditional finance world where you're getting 2.5% on treasuries and like, you know, 5% is like phenomenal return on investment.
Managed funds at 6%.
7 is like, you know, you're the smartest guy on earth. You know, any return from domain sounds pretty damn good. But I think if you're doing it long term, I mean, and I don't know.
I think the risk profile of being a domain investor is a lot higher.
Right.
Yeah.
So you should have a higher return.
You should expect your returns to be a lot higher, right?
Yeah.
When you know, I bought a name yesterday in the auction for $8,000. I personally think that name's worth a lot more than $8,000, obviously, but I may have to hold it for 5 or 10 years and may not.
Yeah, but I was discussing portfolio-wise. So if you're not selling, then you're not making returns on investments. So not on.
It depends what your time horizon is. Though.
Yeah, but like return on investment is a year. Like on a year, you make a return.
So there's many different types of portfolios. You've got portfolios that monetize well, and so if you've got a portfolio that monetizes, then you know, unfortunately, most of the names that monetize really well are not names that are great for reselling for a high value. And so, like a return on investment from a monetization standpoint, because those names typically don't have a lot of like resale upside, you're really looking at it from a straight return on investment standpoint. And the risk profile is quite high because maybe there's some trademarks in there, maybe, you know, the traffic sources on those domains are going to die off. There's a whole bunch of factors. But so you're typically like, you know, anywhere from 6 months at the low end to 36 months at the high end. So that means, you know, like, I don't know, what does that mean ROI standpoint?
2 to 3x if you're going long.
Yeah.
But so the other thing is, depends on what cycle you are of your investing, right? So there are some years where my investments greatly outweigh my returns. Yeah. Right. So in 1 year.
Yeah, but that's not our ROE. Like all the investments you made in the past are also adding to your ROE. Like you have to, on all the investments, you made in the past.
But what I'm saying is there are some years where I sold names, but the sales all from including, you know, the prior portfolio were dwarfed by how much money I put back in. So I guess I'm not answering the question, right?
So the God's honest truth is it's a very difficult question to answer. It's extremely subjective to who is the owner and what is the portfolio.
And what you're doing with your investments, you might be increasing your inventory. That's what I do. Is I buy far more than I sell.
No, but that doesn't influence ROI.
But
right? Reinvestment still is part of the money reinvested still goes into your ROI. So it's honestly a really difficult. If you can give me context, I could be like, well, I think if you're not doing this, you know.
Well, I'd also say that in a lot of cases, when someone's selling a portfolio, unfortunately, it's because they're not in a great position and they haven't been able to sell names, and they're actually selling for a loss because they're saying, oh crap, I haven't sold any of these, what's going on? I've been trying to sell them, I've held these for 5 years, I can't do anything with them, I put, say, 100,000 into this, and they blast it out to a bunch of brokers and a bunch of different people and go, hey, does someone want to buy this portfolio? And they blast it out to a bunch of other people, and someone goes, I don't know, like 35K, and they go, I don't want that, but that's the highest bid, and I just want to get rid of these. So I think a lot of people do, once they're at the point where they want to sell a portfolio, I don't think there are more people that are in the position where they're like, oh, my portfolio is so amazing, I'm going to sell it for a huge ROI. I think there's a lot of people who are like, crap, my portfolio sucks. I just have to get rid of this and cut my losses.
I think the reality is that unless you have a very long time horizon, the ROI is probably not very good.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's like a desperation move a lot of times.
Right. And even it depends.
The fact of the carrying costs on that.
Right, the carrying costs and the size of your portfolio, because I know if you have a lot of domains to sell, then you limit who can afford that, right? So you have less potential buyers.
Yeah, go ahead. You can afford.
Carrying cost is also an interesting topic in itself because it's not just the $9 a year to renew your domains.
Time.
Like we've got millions of dollars invested into domains that I could put into T-bills that are 100% safe and earn me 2.5% a year. And so there's an opportunity cost to that capital because that capital is dead. Like yes, we monetize a little bit and might cover my renewal cost, but there's a very real opportunity cost to the capital. It's tied up in a bunch of domains which are not liquid, and
you could have put into Bitcoin at $150, right?
Right, but hopefully appreciating in value.
Yeah. So, but it's just that domains are a unique asset class in that they don't necessarily cash flow very well, or the ones that you would traditionally resell don't cash flow very well. And so because they don't cash flow, and most valuation models are based on cash flow, like you almost have to inherently use that opportunity cost of capital as a part of your carrying cost if you're going to do real financial modeling, because that opportunity cost is very real.
Yeah. Right.
I think like the starting point of a beginning domainer should be a target ROI.
Right.
And watch if you're getting that point.
Yeah. So for me, target ROI in year one should be cover your renewal costs. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
Cover your renewal costs.
Yeah, but then you probably have an ROI somewhere later on, and you should monitor if you are catching that ROI.
Yeah, you need a business plan, but that's why it's such a hard question, because people's business plans depend on their circumstances and a lot of variables. But yes, you're exactly right. You should have a business plan.
But I've got clients that do this on the side, and they just think domains are cool, and it's like their ROI is they made 5, 10. I mean, Shane Coulter, it's like a perfect example. Like, he just wants to make a little extra money on the side that he can redeploy into domains or into whatever it is he feels like, right? And, he doesn't need to feed his family with that. But if you're trying to feed your family with it, then it's like, it's again subjective. It's like, you got to feed your family. How much money you need to feed your family? Put a roof over your head and get your car and cover your insurance and your medical, and, that's what you need. And so, okay, your nut is 60 grand. Well, you probably need, $300,000 to $500,000 in domains to cover that nut every year. And you're going to have to keep redeploying and reinvesting.
Yeah, I was a portfolio, not single names.
So portfolio, everybody thinks that if you own a I'm sure everybody on the panel will agree, but everybody thinks that if you own the portfolio that you're going to get more because you have all the bases covered in the portfolio, but really you get a discount.
Yeah.
If you're selling in a portfolio. Portfolio. So
a large discount.
A large discount. So Birkins is a perfect example. His average sale was probably $15,000, $20,000. It would take him 100 years to sell that whole portfolio, but he ended up selling for $500 a piece and made $35 million.
Exactly.
He took account his carrying costs and that time and energy and the need and wanting to retire, and that's what Yun Yi did also. We used to manage his whole portfolio as well. So everybody who has the portfolio strategy has to keep in mind that there's not an increase in value by owning a portfolio. It's actually a decrease for a volume purchase, and the purchaser has to carry those costs that you're sending to them. So all those renewal, if you're talking about 1,000 names, you're $70,000 a year in carrying costs. For $1,000.
You added
1,000 domains.
Yeah.
Maybe like 9,000.
Yeah. Well, sorry, 7,000. Right.
So Dave had a question, and then we're going to wrap up.
First of all, I thought it was a great panel, very informative. I want to go back to what Ammar said.
Moderating.
Ammar said something in the beginning, which I thought I wanted to come back to. If I understood it correctly, what he was saying, and first some people disagreed, I think, he was saying that you can take the wholesale market a lot easier from an appraisal point of view and explain it, and the retail market's a little bit more difficult because there are buyers and sellers, different motivations. But I think he was saying that once in a while it's off the charts because the name, like Drew and I discussed a name not too long ago that could be off the charts, right? So he was saying either the buyer has so much money or the seller is so desperate or the name is just so out there that it could be. So I find that when I talk to buyers or sellers and I explain appraisals and valuations, when I get to the point of, but all that said, what if?
Yeah.
That's the most interesting conversation I have with buyers and sellers. I'm just curious, how do you guys handle that when it comes up?
I just say you can't make a business plan on what if. Right. So, look, you're hiring me because you trust me to, take your asset and try and maximize its value. And this is what I think the actual value is. And then, yes, there are all these subjective factors, but I'm not going to spend my time, nobody's paying me up front. I'm going to go out and spend my time for free to find you the best buyer for your domain to maximize its value. And if I sell it, I'm going to get paid. And, we're all at a place where I'm not going to just do that just because. If you've got a great name, I'm not going to go try and sell it unless I agree at least with what the reserve price is. Because otherwise I'm just spinning my wheels. And it's like, you're asking me to go spend my time and resources on a moonshot for no upfront, it's like you're asking me to take the 1% chance that we're going to find that buyer at that price, and I'm going to spend my time to do that. And if we fail, which is a 99% chance or higher, then I get paid nothing. So I don't want to. It's just not. That's not the person I want to work with.
And there's no effort on the seller's part.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. They've got no downside.
Yeah.
They've got no downside. So I want, for me, it's like, you need to have skin in the game, meaning either you pay me a retainer fee up front so that I know you're a serious seller, right? And I'll apply that to the commission. But if you're going to pay me a retainer up front, then I know that you've made up your mind that, okay, I want to sell this domain. Or you're going to agree with me about what, realistic reserve price is. Because, look, our incentives are aligned. If I sell your domain for $1 million, I make a lot more money than if I sell it for 500. I'm not looking to just sell it for the first guy that comes along. I want to sell it for what I think is really the value of the name to the person who I think is the best buyer for that name. But I don't want to spin my wheels. So, if we can't get that perfect buyer with if we can't get the stars to align, I want to know that I've got this name at a price, not some lowball price, but a price that I think is realistic, that can be supported by data, that I can say, look, this is the value of the name, and if I've got a buyer that I think should own that name, then I can justify that value.
With comps.
No. Not using comps.
Just like real estate.
Yeah, I think we should wrap it up.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap it up. Don't stand yet. Okay, no, he can.
I have a quick question, real quick.
I thought we were wrapping up.
Yeah. I know we are, but on this one particular topic, and you all sell a lot of domains into the U.S. Depreciation is something that in real estate, I watched my father sell about $25 million in real estate. The Rule of 72 is a really interesting return theory that I would recommend anybody look at. It basically says that any asset should double every 10 years. Very quantified with real estate, right? One thing that they look at more seriously is the depreciation component when they're buying the piece of property. So if I know in the U.S. I can get amortization or depreciation of it amortized over 15 years, the government can buy my name over the next 15 years. And why, as an industry, every geographic is going to handle that depreciation differently, but why do you think we don't talk about that more? I feel like that's an important component of how we could really lift prices of what we sell.
Probably because we don't want to give tax advice, but I did talk to my accountant about that, and I would, I'd suggest you do. But that's a good point, and I do have an accountant.
But that's just, but that's just a paper. That's just
It is paper,
it's just
but
paper.
it's
It's not real.
Right.
So
It's real when you make a profit, and the only way they're going to get $30 million to buy voice.com is if they believe they can make a profit.
well, no. But the depreciation only affects their
Offsetting gains.
right. So, but I mean, but that's not real. I guess I don't know. I've had this debate with my.
It's based on their entire business.
Right.
You can't look at it that way. If it's domain only and it's just parking traffic revenue,
But
then
I'm
you
going
can
to
do
pay
that.
you a premium, a super premium, $30 million for parking traffic revenue.
No, but if you use voice as an example, that's going to be a business. You can't apply the same.
Yeah.
Well,
The same.
I guess what I'm saying to end user businesses.
So we do talk about that in certain cases, but the thing is that unfortunately most companies are treating these domain purchases as a marketing expense. They're not putting it as a corporate asset. They're not treating it as a capital asset. They're buying it and they're treating it as a marketing expense. It's coming out of some department's budget, and that's it.
No, but in that
Usually the
case,
marketing
but treating it as a marketing expense, they're taking the entire write-off that year.
Exactly.
Right. So that's even better than the depreciation,
Yeah.
right? Because they're getting it all on day one.
Yeah.
In year
I
one.
think the IRS will allow in the US
You're-
to write it all off.
You're
Day
right.
one.
You're right.
For
But
you,
they do.
not. But if it's Facebook and they're like just buying some domain and it's it depends on the case. It depends on the use case. It depends on how proportional it is to the business. It depends on a lot of things. And again, I am not an accountant. I don't pretend to be one on the internet. So please speak to an accountant about tax advice.
Go talk to your accountant. Check into this. Here's the IRS code. Go take a look at it. I don't know. I just think.
You're right. One more selling point.
Oh, yeah.
Nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
Thank you. Wonderful.
All right.
Thanks.
So thank you to the panelists. That is the last session of the day. But Soren's going to come up.